Good morning, everybody. Rose Luna here, CEO of the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And thank you for your patience. We have been just all over the place, just really celebrating. Also, we had a wonderful, successful 89th Texas legislative session, not only for TAASA and our membership, but also for the Sexual Assault Survivor Task Force, policy recommendations, budget, like all things have just lined up for us yet again this session. So we're very excited to share what the results are with you. But before we do that, I just have to say that Ashley was the brains behind this operation. I assisted her when she needed. I love that she really put together a nice strategy. She enlisted Kristen Lanau to help as well, and we're very excited about Kristen and her help. I knew that Kristen Lanau is very effective in doing this work, and I'm very thankful to her and to Ashley for helping us get all these things through. And also, what I loved about our process this year is that I think we were a little bit more intentional in bringing a coalition of survivors to come in and testify, and we had it just a little bit more organized this year. And so I think all of that together, the brilliant strategy, our coalition of folks, of stakeholders, most importantly, survivors, and also just the good bills, the good solutions to real world and on the ground type of situations and problems when it comes to crime victims of sexual assault. I think all that together just is why we were so successful this year. So I'm very excited about that. But I'll go ahead and start, and I'm going to hand it to Ashley. But I'll go ahead and start with the thing that I worked on really with Shannon, which is, again, another angel from heaven who is just this miracle worker, Shannon Gangerty. She is our policy lobbyist, and she works a lot with the budget. So I work with her on that, whereas Ashley takes over all the rest of the things, and I just assist and support her however she needs it. But with the budget, y'all, so the big thing that we were afraid of is, and it has been a topic of conversation for a long time, has been VOCA. VOCA is that money that everyone gets: sexual assault programs, domestic violence programs, system-based advocates, law enforcement. I mean, everyone gets a piece of the VOCA pie, and it's so important because there's a lot of good work that's happening locally, and it's able to happen because of VOCA. So we've had some federal situations that span, again, across administrations of VOCA kind of being on the lower end. So they've had VOCA fixes on the federal level that have been a little slow to come through. So the state of Texas and our elected officials, your elected officials, have come together last biennium to fill the gap, and they did it again this year. So we should not see hardly, if any, reductions or hardly at all any reductions to your VOCA dollars. That passed the amount that we needed. We did the math behind the scenes. We got with the governor's office, and we appreciate the governor's office going in out the gate asking for a large amount. We then figured out that we needed just a little bit more to ensure that there was absolutely zero cuts. That's what we're always striving for. We were able to get that extra money, so we should really be as whole as we can get for when it comes to the VOCA dollars here in our state of Texas. So we're very excited to report that, because it kind of went back and forth. But at the end of the day, our elected officials, again, your elected officials, decided that crime victims were important. And were an important component to the budget, and they went ahead and added everything that we asked for is in that budget. So VOCA should be in a healthy place. Also, another thing that we're very excited about, last legislative session, something that we asked for was for a rural and border pilot project. If, y'all, for those of you that have been around me for a while, know that my heart is with rural Texas. I'm from rural Texas, and so any chance I get, any opportunity that I can have to uplift rural communities, I do. And that one way that I tried to do that was by having rural and border pilot projects funding for that. So that happened last legislative session. It was so successful. We've got a great story to tell. We have documents that we're putting together. We'll be sending those out for those that are interested to learn about what's happening. We've worked in conjunction with the Office of the Attorney General. It's been a great partnership for that. But we were also able to get an increase for that pilot project for another biennium. So we're very super excited about the great work and to see what continues to happen in those communities, in rural and border communities in the state of Texas. And the last thing in the budget that that was successful and that we were happy about is that TAASA was able to, we've been given an increase in our budget to be able to continue the centralized training and resources that is so desperately needed. Currently, right now, we're working on a project called the Texas Court Advocacy Training that will at some point help local programs keep their certification training program up to par if you utilize that. So we're still in the process of building that, piloting that project, but we have a wait list that's just so long, and we only have like 2.5 staff people that work on that. So this is going to allow us to beef that staffing up to be able to allow more people to be a part of that. So again, the end goal of that is to have everyone learning and training about sexual assault in the same way, so that in the state of Texas, when we do this work, we're all doing it under the same understanding, the shared definitions, all of the things, all consistent, so that that we have that going on here in the state of Texas. So again, super excited about the budget successes that we had, and I just wanted to share that with y'all. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hand it over to Ashley to talk about all the other amazing things we're able to get done. So thank y'all so much. Here you go. Hand it off to you, Ashley.
All right. Thanks, Rose. Yeah, that budget news is great. Great work for you and Shannon. Awesome news. Okay, well, I wanted to update everyone on our 5 legislative priorities that passed this session. The first one I'm going to talk about is House Bill 3073. So this was one of the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force recommendations that we worked on. And it has to do with addressing the problems with our consent laws. I've talked about this on every episode, I think, of TAASA Talks this go around. For me personally, this was top priority legislation, because if we can get our consent laws more aligned with what is actually happening, we're going to be able to put more rapists in jail. We worked with some great senators and House members, specifically Representative Howard and Senator Paxton. Both of them and their staff were amazing in helping us pass this bill. We ended up naming it the Summer Willis Act, and I'd like to give a shout out to Representative Ann Johnson for that, and a shout out to Summer Willis, who, if you haven't heard her story, it's very moving, and she's a very inspirational woman who was sexually assaulted when she was at a fraternity party. And unfortunately, she was drugged by one person and raped by another. And that is not protected under Texas's current consent statutes. So that was one of the provisions that we sought to address with House Bill 3073. And I'm happy to say that we were able to keep that provision in the bill. We did have to make some compromises, but there is now a provision in statute that basically says that rape is without consent if the perpetrator knows that the other person is intoxicated or impaired by any substance to the extent that the other person is incapable of consenting. I know it's kind of a mouthful, but prior to this bill that we passed, it just said that the person who was attempting to rape you, they were the ones that had to drug you or impair you, and they had to do it without you knowing as well. So those were 2 hurdles that, and 2 limitations within the law that were making it almost impossible for any convictions with this particular definition. And the other provision in this bill that is going to be the most helpful to prosecutors is we have kind of flipped the definition of consent from just a long list of what is without consent to now having an affirmative consent definition. It just now aligns consent with the definition, consent with regard to sexual assault with the definition of consent that is used throughout the rest of the penal code, which is consent means assent in fact, whether express or apparent. I know that sounds like some weird legalese, but in layman's terms, it basically says that means that consent has to be, or consent can be expressed through body language or vocally, and it is apparent to the perpetrator or the actor. And so what this does is now the burden is on the perpetrator to prove they got consent instead of the victim to prove they didn't get consent. And this is amazing because it never should have been like that in the first place. So again, major props to Senator Paxton, Representative Howard, and Summer Willis, and all the people who came and helped support us on this legislation.
And Ashley, I just wanted to kind of mention to everyone that this was another heavy, I mean, all of them are heavy lifts, right? But this was a heavier than usual lift because we tried to do this last session and it
And the
didn't.
session before.
Oh, and the session before. Oh my God, that's right. You're right. And it's been a really hard thing to do. And so congratulations, Ashley, for getting it through this year. And also, I mean, I think it's important for folks to know because you had mentioned how there were some, negotiations that had to happen. So it's usually, I mean, I think one of the highest misconceptions out there is that we write this bill or this bill is written and it goes all the way through in one piece. And unfortunately, that's not what happens. It'll get here. Someone wants to change it. It just changes and morphs. And we did everything we could to keep this thing as true to form as we could. But there were negotiations along the way. But I think at the end of the day, it is a great step in the right direction when it comes to consent. So congratulations again. I just thought this was one of those heavy lists. Wanted to remind folks. I forgot. You're right. We 2 sessions. We finally got it done. Third time the charm.
Yeah. I'm so happy we got that passed. Like that really is going to be such an amazing tool for prosecutors to actually be able to hold people accountable. All right, so we can go on to the next bill. And this is the other recommendation from the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force. And this was kind of the omnibus legislation that had all the other recommendations from the task force in it. It had multiple provisions. Excuse me. I know we've gone over them before, but I'll just kind of highlight them here. And again, shout out to Representative Howard and Senator Zaffirini. They were amazing stewards of this bill and getting it passed. Specifically, Rep. Howard worked with the Speaker of the House to get a priority bill number, which for those of you unfamiliar with the legislative process, bills are sent to committee in the order that they are filed. So being House Bill 47, that was one of the first bills sent to a committee, which is amazing. And then also Senator Zaffirini, she fought so hard to get this bill a hearing at the end of the session in the Senate. It had made its way through the House and then it just had to get through the Senate. And we were up against some deadlines and a lot of House bills trying to get a hearing in the Senate. And just so much thanks to Senator Zaffirini for putting her full weight behind this bill to get it a hearing in the Senate and then ultimately getting it passed out of the Senate with unanimous support. But yeah, so the main provisions in this bill, it's all kind of about different safety measures for survivors. So there's one pertaining to safety in your home. And basically under current law, survivor who is renting their property is only allowed to break their lease if the sexual assault occurred on the premises of where they live. And as many people know, most sexual assault is, especially for adults, it's done by someone you know. And they likely know where you live. And you can feel pressure or threats if you choose to report that sexual assault. So allowing a survivor to break their lease, regardless of where the sexual assault occurs, is going to be a major improvement for sexual assault survivors to not only feel empowered to report, but to then continue to feel safe in their home. And another safety provision we did with regard to public transportation is to close a dangerous loophole that allows for rideshare drivers to not have to be cleared by the state sex offender registry. My understanding is that they currently are only checked against the federal sex offender registry, which has different parameters and qualifications for that sex offender registry. So we have now closed that loophole, and now all rideshare drivers have to be checked against the state sex offender registry. And then another safety provision is with regard to in the courts. So we are now allowing for an adult sexual assault survivor's impact statement to be considered when a defendant is pushing for a continuance. Under current law, that right only was extended to minors who are sexually assaulted, and it can be just as impactful and detrimental to an adult survivor if their case is prolonged months, years. So this is just saying the court now has to consider the impact on the victim if they're going to allow for a continuance. And then another safety provision has to do with personal health. And this is a great one. Right now, survivors can for the most part, only receive emergency care reimbursements through crime victims compensation with that initial emergency room visit. We passed a provision within this bill that allows for 30-day follow-up care, and that includes STD medications and any other follow-up prescriptions and things that could last for 30 days following the incident. It will, ensure that survivors receive competent medical care during their exam. And we are also requiring that within this healthcare section that all personnel of an emergency room, including doctors, nurses, admin staff, receive just a 1 to 2 hour training on how to interact and properly treat victims of a sexual offense, because too often, and not intentionally, but victims are re-traumatized by medical staff not aware of the proper way to interact with someone who has just experienced a physical trauma. And then there's one last provision within that bill that just requires that all of the information that sexual assault response teams collect in their biennial reports now needs to be shared with the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force in the Office of the Governor. And that would just allow them to compile this information and find trends and data and maybe where improvements need to be made. And I just think that will be an amazing tool for the task force to be able to use. Sorry, I know that was a lot, but that bill had a lot of pieces to it. And we're just very excited that they all passed. Okay, next. Oh, Rose, did you have anything to add on that one?
All I was going to say was that I think that this bill represents the collaboration and the expertise that we have at a statewide level, which shows the efficacy of that Sexual Assault Survivor Task Force, which we passed back in the 86th. That was my first session as CEO of TAASA, HB 1590, that created the task force. And I'm just thinking of, wow, look how far we've come, because those are real world safety concerns that survivors have that came up through the collaboration of the task force work groups. And now that we've addressed a lot of, again, sometimes it's tiny fixes that mean so much. And I feel like that's something we did. Like, for example, the lease. Oftentimes survivors, if they're, when they're not assaulted in their home, but they were assaulted in the town or in the city, that sometimes they just want a fresh start. And they should be able to do that. Sometimes safety to them is, I want to just move down the street, or I want to move. And before they couldn't do that without messing up their credit or breaking a lease and all the things like that. So now they'll be able to do that safely without, the hardships of what creditors and all those things that happens with them. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate just the collaborative work. And I think, again, this is just an outcome of the efficacy of the Sexual Assault Survivor Task Force that Representative Howard, actually, that was her brainchild back then. And then we were able to help get that through along with CAC Texas. And it's just, wow, how great to see everything that's happening there. So just want to say that. That's all.
Okay, the next bill that we passed, this will be one of TASA's own priority pieces of legislation. And this was our Crime Victims' Rights Bill. This is something that we did try to pass last session, but we were thwarted by prosecutors who didn't like some of the provisions in that bill, but we did our best to work with them in the interim and throughout the legislative session, and we're able to still maintain a bunch of the provisions in there that will help enforce crime victims' rights. One of the provisions in this bill, and again, I apologize for doing such a deep dive on these now in this TAASA Talks, but I feel like it's important to know all the provisions of these bills now that they are becoming law. And so one of the provisions in this bill is a right to meaningful notice for survivors. It requires prosecutors to give survivors 5 days notice or notice as soon as reasonably possible about hearings being set, and also notice of a plea bargain hearing, and to get victims' thoughts on the plea bargain. Additionally, we are requiring now for a prosecutor to make it clear to a victim for their own level setting that the prosecutor does not represent the victim. we're requiring that this happens early in the criminal case, so the victims hopefully understand from the beginning that whatever they might want the prosecutor to do, they're not necessarily going to do, unfortunately. But hopefully, by having this level setting done for the victim early on, hopefully there's less, re-traumatization during the criminal case. And another provision that we are most excited about is giving victims a right to counsel. Texas law already states that victims have a right to assert their rights as a crime victim. And this bill now clarifies that victims may have an attorney assert their rights on their behalf. This is very important to us because victims, often as lay people, might not be aware of all their rights or even then how to assert them if they feel they are being violated. And again, this doesn't give them a right to a free attorney, but this is first step. Maybe one day down the line, we can set up some sort of a grant program for that. But this is a first step for victims to have the right to use an attorney to help them assert their rights as a crime victim. And additionally, under that same kind of umbrella, victims now have a right per this law to have an attorney present with them during their forensic interview. Lots of times, those interviews can be hostile and not trauma informed and can treat the victim as though they're someone who did something wrong, and having an attorney present with you for that interview can help, try to strike the right balance on what should actually happen during these forensic interviews. It's about gathering information, not making someone uncomfortable or forcing them into saying something that maybe isn't accurate. And then the final provision in this bill, it requires or it tries to create some sort of an enforcement mechanism for victims to be able to have an advocate present with them during their forensic exam. We have heard instances where some advocates have been not allowed in the exam room. And even though that is clearly stated in law that victims have a right to an advocate, we have now passed this law, which requires with every victim, the healthcare facility to fill out a form saying that the advocate was offered that the victim was offered to have an advocate present with them. And if they didn't have that offered, they have to state why in the form. And with that information, it is my understanding the governor's office will have the power to, withhold state funds or grants for those facilities that are denying victims of their clearly stated rights that already exist.
Texas means business, y'all. Texas means business when it comes to crime victims. I think we see that with the bills that we were able to pass. I think this bill in particular with crime victims' rights, we know we have a long list of all these rights. And as Ashley said earlier, the fact that now that we're able to have an advocate in the room to kind of notate like these are the rights, because again, when you're traumatized and something happens, you're not going to remember all of the things. So it's so imperative to have an advocate there, and the fact that now they can have an attorney present. It's just really, it's not about bucking the system as much as it is to protect the integrity, the rights, and the self-determination of survivors. That's all. We're centering survivors makes every process better. And we feel like this bill is the linchpin that can make that happen. So we're so excited. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Ashley, but
no.
Texas means business about crime victims. That's all I got to say. And I think this bill is one of those things.
Yeah, we're so excited about it. And I should have said it when I first started talking about this bill. I just was excited to dive into it. But so many thanks to Senator Chuy Hinojosa, who has been a great advocate for sexual assault survivors. We've worked with his office a bunch. And of course, the Dean of the House, Representative Symphonia Thompson, who is just a rock star. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but she fought hard to get this bill through the House, using all of her influence and knowledge of the House to make sure this bill did not, there's so many places in the House where a bill can just get jammed up because there's just so many bills in the House. And she really put her weight behind this bill and made sure that it made it all the way through the House. So much thanks to her and her staff on this one.
And this is one that we also tried to pass last session and we were unable to do. So this is great. Great stuff.
Okay, Courtney, ready for the next bill? Excuse me. Sorry. Allergies, hill country, I'm coughing these days. Okay, so this bill, Senate Bill 608, we had this one authored by Senator Flores, chair of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. And again, Representative Howard, she, again, was a rock star on these issues for us. She carried 3 of our 5 bills that we worked on and passed this session. And so just so much thanks to her. So this bill was our tracking safe kit transfers bill. So it was brought to our attention by DPS during the interim that there are quite a few places around the state where rape kits have just been left at healthcare facilities and not picked up within the statutorily required time frame by law enforcement. And we worked with DPS to try to come up with an idea for how to shine light on where these rape kits are located. Because, even if it's just one, that's one too many. That rape kit represents a survivor who went through this multi-hour forensic exam and interview and is expecting their, evidence to be processed. And to find out that it was never even picked up from the healthcare facility can be very traumatizing. And furthermore, that rape kit could be the results that help track down a serial rapist. So DPS and TAASA think so it's very important that we shine light on where these rape kits are. So we came up with this bill, which requires that within DPS's report that they give to the legislature every year about the process and the status of rape kits, it now adds another line of data that they will collect, which is the number of rape kits that are still at a healthcare facility beyond the time frame that law enforcement is supposed to pick it up and where that is located. That is going to be amazing information because those reports from DPS are given to the legislature every year. Additionally, we are requiring that information be included in the SART report that is produced by each county. And that's done every 2 years. So there was some concern that SARTs aren't going to be able to have access to this data, but the makeup of the SART should have members who are able to easily get this data. But if it's still a struggle, since DPS does the report every year and the SART report's only every 2 years, they can easily also pull that data from the DPS report. And again, that report goes to the county commissioner's office, and per the bill I spoke about earlier, HB 47, that information will go directly to the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force too. So hopefully with all these people seeing and shining light on where these rape kits are being left in healthcare facilities, we will be able to put direct pressure on those law enforcement agencies to actually pick those up and have those kits processed. And I will say that the latest numbers from DPS is it's about 150 or so kits that are left at healthcare facilities. And it's in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge number, but still that each one of those represents a survivor who went through the process and is expecting their kit to be processed. So we owe it to them to, get those kits turned into DPS for processing. Okay. And now our final bill that we passed this session. This is our Protecting Survivors Privacy Bill. We worked with Senator Paxton again on this one, and Representative Hull. They, again, I can't speak more highly than I have before, but their staff is just amazing. And both of these elected officials are truly exceptional women who have done amazing work for sexual assault survivors. And our privacy bill had 3 main provisions in it. One had to do with the live streaming of court cases that have been happening in certain parts of the state. And that has been very traumatic for a lot of victims and survivors. And so we now have a provision in law that requires a court, if they want to live stream a case involving a sexual offense, they have to get permission from the victim, the DA, and the defense. And again, like, we're not in COVID times anymore. We don't need these. The courts are open. They're physically open. They don't need to be live streamed for the world. Okay, and then the other provision we have has to do with victims' pseudonyms. And so we were learning that a victim, if they did not request a pseudonym at that first interaction with law enforcement, they missed their chance to request a pseudonym. And that first interaction, the trauma is still so fresh to make that kind of a decision then and there is just not practical for a victim or survivor to be able to do that. So now a victim can request a pseudonym when their case gets to, or actually when their case gets to a criminal court process. So, and again, as many of you know, not most sexual assaults don't end up in going to court, but when they do, the victim should have the right at that point to request a pseudonym, and we have put that in this bill. Additionally, we found out that there's nothing requiring law enforcement to inform victims that they have the right to a pseudonym in that first interaction with law enforcement. So we added that to the bill as well to clarify that. And I will say there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that were already doing this, but not all. And it's because it's not in law, and now it is. So hopefully this will grant more victims the knowledge and the right to use a pseudonym. And then the last provision in that bill regarding survivor safety was just some evidentiary safeguards. We are basically now requiring that any evidence having to do with a forensic exam or any other sensitive, like visual recordings or anything like that, it will now have to be placed under a protective order and can then only be accessed through that process. And this will limit access of the public to those type of things, and then also prohibit the defense from being able to copy or disseminate that evidence. And yeah, I'm just very excited about that bill. I think it's going to go a long way in helping victims' privacy. Rose, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
I was going to say, it's just so important, like the privacy aspect of this. When something like this happens to you or to someone that you care about, it's so important that they have faith in confidentiality provisions and in safety. Sorry about that one. Safety provisions. That wasn't a real dog. That's my phone. Sorry. And this bill does that, y'all. And I wanted to say that also. This bill also represents what TAASA, in our process and in figuring out what we're going to present and give to membership to vote on to make sure that they're okay with what we do with the legislative session. This bill represents just the collaboration of other partners, stakeholders out in the community. In this case, a statewide stakeholder, which is Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS. They have been a great partner with us on many levels, but in order to kind of see some of the tweaks that need to happen, like for example, we were, I didn't know, I would say I did not know. I assumed that it was written in law that was clear, Texas statute, that a victim should be offered a pseudonym. Well, it wasn't clear. It was like, here's a definition of it. Here's where they can find the form to do it. So as Ashley mentioned, we were able to make it clear now that is a part of what they deserve to, what a victim deserves to have, survivor deserves to have access to. But that was because I was working with some folks over at DPS. They were looking at trainings and they were asking me, I was like, no, it's there. And then I was like, oh no, it's not there. So we were able to really get that fixed. So again, and that was a last minute thing. And I was like, hey, Ashley, here's the situation. Do you think? And then Ashley was able to, working with the partners with our folks here, Ashley was able to get that in. So thank you, Ashley, for doing that. That was one of those last minute things that I just said, hey, I think we need this, and you're like, yes, we do. And here's how we're going to do it. So thank you.
I want to let everyone know that, it's not just Rose and I and our policy team or Kristen Lanau who came on board to help. This session, we had so many amazing survivors that came and testified, so many experts, DAs, prosecutors, forensic nurses that came and testified and met with their elected officials. And I know many of you called your elected officials and emailed them about these bills. And you might not see that helped, but it did. Like every little bit helps. And so I just want to thank everyone who testified or reached out to their elected official on any of these bills. Thank you, because it is a group effort to get these bills passed. So just many, many thanks to all of you. And I wanted to let you guys know that, like, we have at least the last 2 legislative sessions, we are working on our big legislative update booklet, which will summarize all of course, TAASA's bills that passed, but also any other bills that have become law from this session having to do with sexual assault. So we're hoping to get that finalized and out in the next month or 2. So we will have that on our website, and we'll disseminate it through all our different ways of sharing information with everyone. So just keep an eye out for that.
And just so y'all know, the work doesn't end here. I know, like, first and foremost, we'll be out there doing legislative updates to different folks every year after legislative session, we get a ton of requests. Can you come do a legislative update? Absolutely, we'll do that. We think it's important that folks on the ground understand what the new laws are and how this impacts survivors. And in that vein, we'll also continue to analyze like how these laws are really impacting real world situations. So we'll be having conversations with our folks on the ground, having conversations with our folks statewide to see if there, any unintended consequences. Not that anyone meant, again, the work doesn't stop here. We understand that, again, with the negotiation, sometimes we have to tweak something that happens. So we're going to continue that work. We're also going to continue to look forward at, dare I say, to the 90th legislative session and what we can start to do there, because at TAASA, it is so important to us that whatever we're trying to get passed is something that is actually completely necessary and impactful locally and for survivors of sexual assault. So the work doesn't stop here. We're going to continue that work. And if you all have any input to the bills or the new laws, we'd love to hear it. Ashley would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. Have those conversations. Again, it's not easy. It's not perfect, but we are making a step in the right direction. And again, I want to thank all the elected officials, everyone from the governor to signing these bills to the elected officials from your districts that helped get these things on the calendars and get these things in committees, voted out at committees. It is one true thing that I can say. The truest thing that I can say right now is Texas means business when it comes to crime victims, and they show it through the Texas laws that were passed this session. So thank you all in that process. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Shannon. This has been a group effort, and I really appreciate y'all. And I think that's it. Is there anything else any parting words, Ashley, that you want to say?
I was just piggyback on what you said a while ago. I already have a 90th legislative session folder going. I really do. Because there were some ideas that came up during the legislative session that it's like we're already in the mix of that was this one. We can't really add anything now, but hey, I've got it on my list for us to start working on in the next interim. So it's never too early to reach out to us with your ideas.
Yes. Thank y'all so much. And we'll be in touch. Oh, conference. If you want to help us celebrate what a great session we had, we're going to be celebrating the whole time we're at conference. So if our conference is going to be in Denton, Texas, it's going to be June 30th through July the 3rd or 2nd, sorry. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, what it is that week. So if you would like to register for in person, you'll have to email conference@taasa.org. Registration is closed for in person, but we do have a few more slots. So we'd love to see you there. We'd love to have you in person as we're having these discussions, not only what happened in the state of Texas, but what's happening federally and all across the board. We'll have the right people in the room. I think the conversations to be had will be there at our conference. And so we look forward to it and we hope to see you there. So thank y'all so much.